When I first told him I was pregnant, he smiled the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Not disbelief, not exactly, but something cautious and measured. He pulled me close, kissed my forehead, and said all the right things. "We're going to be amazing parents," he told me. "I've always wanted a daughter." I didn't ask why he sounded so certain it would be a girl. I was too busy memorizing the moment, filing it away in that private drawer all expectant mothers keep somewhere between their heartbeat and their ribs. He started talking about names almost immediately. Not about paint colors, or strollers, or schools. Just names. "I've always loved Isabel," he said one night while we were folding laundry, like the idea had just occurred to him. I thought it was sweet at first, even poetic. Isabel. It sounded soft, noble. I pictured a quiet child with deep eyes and a patient soul. The name clung to the air longer than the others we tossed around, like it wanted to stay. I added it to the list without thinking. But he wouldn't let go of it. Every conversation circled back. He dismissed anything I suggested. Emma? Too trendy. Lila? Too short. Claire? Too plain. Isabel, he said, was timeless. Regal. The name of someone you respect before you even meet her. One night, I asked him what made it so special to him. He hesitated for the briefest moment, just long enough to make me remember it. Then he smiled that measured smile again and said, "My grandmother loved it. Always wanted me to marry an Isabel." It wasn't the answer I expected, but I didn't press. I just nodded and said, "All right." I didn't say that I'd never heard him mention his grandmother before. I didn't mention that he had a habit of telling stories that shifted slightly every time he repeated them. I let it go. Or, at least, I pretended to. 2 weeks later, I was organizing the hallway closet while he was out. I was looking for baby blankets we'd boxed up after his sister's twins visited last year. That's when I found the small wooden chest I'd never noticed before, tucked neatly behind an old heater and some outdated tax records. It was locked, but the latch was loose. I pressed in just enough to lift the lid. Inside, a bundle of letters. Yellowing envelopes, all addressed in the same soft cursive. The return name, Isabel Moreau. My fingers trembled as I opened the first one. The writing was delicate, intimate. There were references to university memories, to a hidden garden they'd found in Paris, to nights spent under borrowed sheets and whispered promises. And one line I'll never forget, "Even if we never end up together, know that no one will love you the way I did. Not even your wife." I read every letter. 23 in total. Dated from before our marriage, but after we'd started seeing each other. The timelines overlapped, the sentiments didn't fade. Even after he and I were serious, she was still signing her name with love. He never told me about her. Never once mentioned that name in any story about his past. But now I understood. It wasn't just a name to him. It was a shrine. He wanted to name our daughter after the woman who had broken his heart and left a mark he clearly never wanted healed. That night, when he came home, I didn't say a word. I cooked dinner. We watched a movie. He fell asleep on the couch. And I sat in the dark with my hand over my stomach and whispered to the baby growing inside me. "You'll never carry her name. I promise you that." The next morning, he made pancakes, humming while he cooked, like the man I thought I married. He kissed my cheek and asked how I slept. I told him I'd had strange dreams. He laughed and said, "Must be the hormones." That's when I knew he still believed he was ahead of me, still in control of the story he was writing for both of us. But I had turned a page he didn't know existed. Over breakfast, I brought up names again. I listed off 3 new suggestions. Eleanor. Sophie. Maeve. He wrinkled his nose at each one, playing the part of the charming but opinionated partner. "Eleanor is too stiff," he said. "Sophie sounds like a neighbor's dog." He didn't even explain why he dismissed Maeve. He just shook his head and returned to his coffee. Then, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, he said, "But Isabel still sounds perfect, doesn't it?" I studied him. Every word he said had the rhythm of habit. He didn't even try to hide it. He'd said it so many times, rehearsed it like a line in a play. Isabel. 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 Each time, softer, sweeter, more inevitable. I asked him what her middle name should be. He looked up, caught off guard. Middle name? Yes, I said. If we're naming her Isabel, what's the middle name? He paused. Then shrugged. I don't know. Something neutral. Grace? Rose? Both were lovely. Safe. Generic. I nodded and smiled. Maybe Elena? He thought for a second, then nodded. Sure. Sounds pretty. I filed that away. Later that afternoon, while he was out running errands, I sat down with my laptop and started digging. I needed to know more. About her. About the letters. About what she meant to him, not just emotionally, but contextually. Who was this woman whose name had floated through our house like perfume I couldn't name? She was easy to find. Isabel Moreau. Photographer. Based in Montreal now. Her work was abstract, distant, heavy with emotion. In one interview, she described heartbreak as a constant collaborator in my creative process. Her photos, if moody, muted, carried captions that sounded like old poetry. I saw a photo of her standing barefoot on a hilltop at dusk. In the background, there was a man out of focus, walking away. He looked like my husband. I didn't confront him. I didn't even print the photo. I just closed my laptop and made a decision. This wouldn't be a conversation. It wouldn't be a fight. He didn't deserve that stage. This would be my performance now. Quiet. Precise. Unannounced. That night, I called my lawyer. I wasn't planning to leave him. Not yet. Not unless more truths emerged. But I wanted the groundwork laid. I wanted my medical proxies updated. I wanted my will revised. I wanted to make sure that if anything happened during delivery, or after, I had a say in what happened to my daughter. Not him. Not his fantasies. Me. My lawyer was a woman named Elena Shore. Young, but sharp. Professional without being cold. When I explained the situation, carefully, calmly, she didn't ask judgmental questions. She didn't gasp or pity me. She said, "So you'd like to ensure the father doesn't get full custody by default if anything happens to you?" Yes. Consider it done. We hung up after 20 minutes. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after, staring at the closed wooden chest that I had now locked myself. He hadn't touched it. Probably didn't even realize I had. But it didn't matter anymore. Because something in me had shifted. Not in anger. Not even in sadness. But in certainty. And sometimes that's all you need to change everything. From that day forward, I stopped arguing with him. I stopped suggesting names, stopped raising my voice, stopped correcting his version of things. If he said Isabel was the name, I nodded. If he referred to her as Izzy in public, I smiled. If he told our friends, "We've picked out the name," I let him believe it. Because I was done negotiating with someone who thought compromise meant pretending I didn't exist. He mistook my silence for agreement. He mistook my compliance for healing. He didn't realize I had taken everything he'd given me, the lies, the erasures, the quiet betrayals, and turned them into tools. That's the thing about betrayal. When it cuts deep enough, you stop bleeding and start building. The pregnancy moved forward. My belly swelled, the nursery took shape, the doctor appointments became more frequent. And every time we parked at the clinic, He'd rest his hand on my stomach and say something like, "You and Isabel are my world." It was rehearsed, always in public, always performative. Like he thought saying her name aloud gave him the right to own her. I gave myself permission to withdraw, not emotionally, but tactically. I memorized names of hospital staff. I paid close attention to consent forms. I had every medical document sent directly to me. I updated the emergency contact list to reflect my lawyer, not him. And on one quiet Tuesday afternoon, I met with Elena in person for the first time. Her office was minimal. Clean lines, pale wood, no photographs on her desk. She looked young enough to be underestimated, but when she stood to shake my hand, there was steel in her grip. I told her everything. Not just the legal requests, but the whole story, the drawer of letters, the name, the way he had quietly replaced my identity with a shadow from his past. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she didn't offer me pity. She offered me language. "We can ensure," she said, "that your daughter is protected from being used as an extension of someone else's nostalgia. There are ways." I nodded. Good. Because I want her to know she wasn't born to fulfill someone else's unfinished story. By the end of the week, all the paperwork was in motion. My will was updated. My hospital directives were clear. My delivery preferences were legally binding. And most importantly, I had one final form signed, sealed, and ready for the birth certificate registry. The first name, Elena. He still didn't know. He wouldn't until it was too late to change it. Every time he called her Isabel, I made a note. Every time he told someone that it was his choice, I smiled politely and changed the subject. I didn't correct him. I didn't defend myself. I wasn't trying to win an argument, I was building a future. Sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. Sometimes it's about construction, building something so solid, so thought out, that it quietly replaces what was broken. He gave me the blueprint by showing me what not to be. And I followed it all the way to the day I gave birth. To a daughter who would never be named after a ghost, but after the woman who helped me bury one. The day came quietly. No drama. No screaming into the night like in the movies. Just a slow tightening in my stomach that began before sunrise, a whisper of urgency. I didn't wake him right away. I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, watching the room turn gray with dawn. It felt like I was standing on the edge of something vast and irreversible, not just labor, but a different life waiting to be delivered. When I finally nudged him, he groaned, mumbled something about needing 5 more minutes, and rolled over. I waited. I timed my contractions. When I spoke again, he realized I wasn't joking. Then came the scrambling, the rushing, the bag forgotten and then remembered, the car keys dropped on the floor. He wasn't ready. But I was. At the hospital, the nurses were kind. They saw through him immediately. I don't know how. Maybe it was the way he kept checking his phone. Maybe it was how he asked more about Wi-Fi than about my vitals. Maybe it was the way he said, "Let me know when it's serious," as if he was waiting to be called into a meeting rather than witnessing the birth of his daughter. When the pain intensified, he was in the hallway. He'd gone to get coffee. I didn't ask for him. I asked for the nurse. I asked for the clipboard. I asked for the form. The birth certificate registration form. They handed it to me during a lull, when the contractions paused long enough for breath and thought. The nurse pointed to the section where I could write the name. "Don't worry," she said gently, "you can always change it before discharge. But if you know, it's best to write it now." I didn't hesitate. First name, Elena. Middle name, Grace. Last name, my maiden name. I paused at the last line. Legally, we shared a last name. But I asked if the child had to carry it. The nurse smiled faintly. "No. You can choose." I chose mine. When the baby came, the room was bathed in sterile light and quiet strength. It wasn't the chaos people talk about. It was raw, yes. But controlled. I bore down. I roared through the silence. And when she finally arrived, small, red, impossibly real, they placed her on my chest, and for the first time in months, I felt entirely clean. She opened her eyes, and I whispered, "Hello, Elena," like it was a sacred spell. He came in minutes later, breathless, holding a coffee he never drank. "She's beautiful," he said. "She's perfect." And then, "Isabel?" I didn't answer. He repeated it, like he thought I hadn't heard him. "Isabel?" The nurse gently corrected him. "Her name's Elena. It's on the certificate." He blinked. Smiled awkwardly. No, her name is Isabel." We agreed. I looked at him. And with a voice that didn't rise, that didn't tremble, I said, "You agreed." I chose. His smile vanished. His mouth opened, then closed. He stepped back from the bed like he'd been slapped. But there was no anger in my face. No defiance. Just peace. He wanted to argue. I could feel it building in his throat. But one look at Elena, swaddled and sleeping, silenced him. Because he knew. He knew I hadn't acted out of spite. I had acted with purpose. With clarity. With the kind of resolve he'd never bothered to learn from me. I turned my face back to my daughter. And he stood there, holding a coffee cup that had gone cold in his hand. The silence between us stretched from the hospital to the parking garage, then from the ride home to the way he barely spoke when unpacking the car. He didn't ask to hold her. He didn't ask to feed her. He just moved around like a man carrying a grudge too heavy to put down, but too proud to admit he was struggling under the weight. 3 days after discharge, I walked into the nursery with Elena in my arms and found him standing in front of the framed nameprint he had ordered months ago. "Welcome, baby Isabel." It was still in the box, unopened. He turned as I entered. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched. "So that's it? You just went behind my back? Didn't even tell me? You named her without me?" I adjusted Elena in my arms. She was sleeping peacefully. I moved slowly, deliberately, settling her into the crib. Only then did I speak. "I told you months ago that I didn't want that name." "But you never said no," he snapped. "Because you never gave me space to." He flinched. "I thought we were a team." "We weren't. You were a director, and I was supposed to read my lines." He paced across the room, then stopped at the window. "Why Elena? Where did that even come from?" I let the silence answer for a moment before replying. "She's the person who helped me through everything you pretended not to see. She's the one who gave me my voice back. She helped me remember I didn't have to live in your story." He turned slowly. His eyes narrowed. "Your lawyer?" I didn't confirm it. I didn't need to. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "So this is revenge?" "No," I said quietly. "This is clarity. You tried to name our daughter after someone who never loved you enough to stay. Someone you buried letters for. Someone you carried into our home like a ghost in your pocket." He shook his head. "You're being dramatic. You were naming our child after a woman who had no place in our lives. And you did it without shame. Without apology. Now you know what that feels like." He looked at the crib. "I would have been a good father to Isabel." "She's not Isabel," I said, calmly. "She never was. That name didn't belong to her. It belonged to your past. Elena is her own person. And I won't let you write over her like you tried to write over me." For the first time since the birth, I saw his expression falter, not into anger, but into something like uncertainty. Like he realized he didn't know who I was anymore. And maybe never had. He turned and walked out of the room without another word. I stayed. I stood by the crib and watched Elena sleep. I thought about all the things I hadn't said, not because I was afraid, but because he wasn't ready to hear them. He had already decided who I was supposed to be before he ever really listened. And now, he would have to live with the silence he helped create. That night, he didn't sleep in our bed. The next morning, the framed baby Isabel print was gone from the hallway. And for the first time since I found those letters, I didn't feel heavy. I didn't feel furious. I didn't even feel triumphant. I just felt free. Weeks passed. The house shifted. It no longer felt like a shared space. He was still there, physically, at least, but everything else had changed. He was quieter, more cautious. His touches felt calculated, like he was performing affection rather than offering it. He tried small gestures, making dinner, folding laundry, ordering baby books. But none of them reached me. Because I wasn't holding a grudge, I was holding the truth. And once you've held the truth in your hands, there's no going back to something that required your blindness. He never said Isabel again. Not once. I waited for an apology. Not because I needed it to heal, but because I wondered if he was capable of offering one. But it never came. What came instead were fragments of discomfort, a growing distance, conversations that ended before they began, a silence in his eyes that mirrored the one he had always kept between us. The irony was, now that Elena was here, I saw him more clearly than I ever had before. Elena grew quickly. Every morning she brought light into rooms that had once been filled with shadow. She smiled early. Laughed easily. She didn't carry the weight of anyone's past. She was untouched by disappointment, by bitterness, by the ghosts her father had tried to resurrect. She belonged entirely to the present. And every time I said her name, I felt like I was planting a flag in new ground. A name not borrowed from someone else's heartbreak, but chosen from a place of strength and vision. One evening, after a long day of juggling bottles and bills, I sat in her room with the lights dimmed low. She was asleep in my arms, breathing softly, her tiny fingers curled into my shirt. I looked around the nursery. The walls were soft cream, the shelves filled with quiet joy of books, handmade toys, photos of us. Not him. Us. On the dresser sat a framed note. I had written it the week after her birth. You were never a second choice. You were never a replica of someone else. You were never born to honor a memory. You are the beginning of something entirely new. And you carry a name that means light. Elena, for the one who reminded your mother that silence is not the same as peace. I didn't know if I would stay with him long term. I wasn't rushing to make declarations. I wasn't trying to punish or parade. But I knew this, I had reclaimed my voice. I had named my child from the quiet fire that grows when you stop waiting to be chosen, and choose yourself instead. Later that night, I found him in the kitchen, staring into a glass of wine like it might tell him how he got here. I didn't interrupt. I just said goodnight, kissed my daughter's forehead, and closed the bedroom door behind us. Some battles are loud. Others are won in stillness. And some are won the moment you say, no. Not this time. That's what I gave my daughter. Not revenge. But permission. Permission to never be someone else's unfinished sentence. And the power to write her own name on the world, without apology.